Good evening. So tonight is the 10th of Shevat, and the 10th of Shevat has a special quality to it because Hi Chesed and Rivka, that's nice seeing you. The 10th of Shevat has a special quality because in 1950, it's the day the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, the 6th Lubavitcher Rebbe, passed away. And that means that it's the day that the next Lubavitcher Rebbe, the 7th Rebbe, became Rebbe, in effect. Now, before he passed away, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak prepared a certain discourse, a Maimah Chasidut, a Hasidic discourse, which was very dear to his heart. He had said it in over 2 Shabbatot, like in 2 goes, as it were, in many, many years earlier, shortly after he became Rebbe, when his father passed away. So his father passed away, and it was in 1920, and he then became the Rebbe, and this was in Russia in a very stormy period with the Bolshevik Revolution just happening 1917, and a very, very difficult time for the Jewish people in Russia. And in 1923, he said this discourse. And in 1939, he published a version of it, which was given out to the Hasidim. And again, in 1950, he published it and asked the Hasidim to study it on the day of the 10th of Shevat. Now that day had been was and is the yahrzeit of his grandmother Rivka. And hi Eve, it's nice seeing you. And so he published it for the 10th of Shevat for the yahrzeit of his grandmother. But then on that day, he passed away. So his successor, his son-in-law, Rabbi Menachem Mendel, took this as a spiritual, very meaningful spiritual idea. Hi, Eleanor. The way that the Rebbe, at first, our Rebbe, that's the 7th Rebbe, said, we don't need a Rebbe, we've got the teachings of the 6th Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, all we have to do is follow his directives. But people kept urging him to be an actual Rebbe. Hi, Deborah, nice seeing you. People kept urging him to accept the mantle of leadership, and he did that a year later on the yahrzeit, on the 10th of Shevat, 1951. Hi to Elabina.
Hello, how are you?
Nice seeing you.
Lovely to see you too.
So he accepted that on the 10th of Shevat, and the way he accepted it was by saying a discourse, basically based on the previous Rebbe's discourse, Bati Legani, I've come into my garden. And in that discourse, he particularly focused on the first chapter, like elaborating the first chapter. There are 20 chapters in the original discourse. It's actually 4 discourses together. Hi, Sarah.
Hi there, Tali. So sorry I'm late.
Okay, don't worry. So it's really 4 discourses together, each one with 5 chapters. So 1952, on the yahrzeit, he said the discourse again, now elaborating the 2nd chapter. And so it went through year by year until 1970. He completed it, elaborating the last chapter. 1971, he began again. And then the very last years, he really stopped saying discourses in public, but and then it was in then he had in the 90s he had a stroke first, and then he passed away in 1994. So So we have this cycle of discourses, and they are fascinating discourses, all explaining this theme of Bati Legani, which I've come into my garden, which is a very, very beautiful, powerful concept. And this year would be the 13th year in the cycle. So in 1963, he said a discourse elaborating the 13th chapter of the original discourse, and again in 1983. So this evening we're going to study the discourse from 1983. So that's the discourse we're going to explore. But first of all, let's try to understand the basic theme of the discourse. I'm going to be sharing the screen. Bati Legani is a phrase from the Song of Songs, chapter 5, the beginning of chapter 5. Bati Legani, I've come into my garden. Achoti, my sister. Chala, my bride. Ariti mori im besami. I have smelled the myrrh and the spices. Achalti yari im difshi. I've eaten these special sweet things with my honey. Shatiti yeni im chalavi. I've drunk my wine with my milk. Ichlu reim. Eat, friends. Shtu, drink. V'shichlu dodim. Let the lovers be drunk, literally. Now, the Midrash takes, first of all, you understand that the Song of Songs is regarded as a very sacred text. There's actually a discussion about it in the Talmud. Isn't it just a love song? And Rabbi Akiva said all the books of the Tanakh, all the books of the Bible are holy, but the Song of Songs is holy of holies. So he emphasized how important the Song of Songs is. And the Midrash takes these words that I've come into my garden and explains that as referring to the divine presence coming into the garden, like the garden of the Garden of Eden, or his bridal chamber, as it's sometimes put. That means he's come to the divine presence has come to its original place. That at the very beginning of existence, there was Adam and Eve together with the divine presence in the Garden of Eden. And that is how it's supposed to be, with the divine presence together with human beings. However, they sinned, they ate from the tree of knowledge, and then Cain killed Abel, and there were other sins, and each time there was a serious sin of this kind, the divine presence departed. And then came 7 tzaddikim, 7 righteous men. Abraham began the process of bringing the divine presence back into the world, and then Isaac and Jacob, and it goes on for 7 generations, and finally the 7th generation is Moses, who brings the divine presence down to earth again. The same way that the divine presence had been there in the Garden of Eden, so the divine presence was there at Mount Sinai and in the Mishkan, the sanctuary that Moses and the Jewish people built at the bottom of Mount Sinai. They were camped at Mount Sinai when they built the sanctuary, and then they carried it with them through the desert. And eventually it became the temple in Jerusalem. And so the divine presence dwelling in the temple, that is the way in which this God comes back to the origin of being in the Garden of Eden together with Adam and Eve. And so the purpose of creation is, or the purpose of the process that we're in, is to reestablish that dwelling of the divine together with humanity, and particularly in the temple in Jerusalem, with the service of the Jewish people, connecting all of humanity to God. So that's the basic theme of this discourse, like taking that from the Midrash. And so that's what we're going to try to explore together. the actual discourse which the Rebbe said in 1983. So I'm going to look for the melody of the Maimah, if I can find it. Can you hear the melody?
No, I can't. Why don't you
No?
sing it instead? That was nice.
Is that better? Can you
It's
hear it?
going off and on. It's going off and on.
Yeah, we can't really hear it.
No, can't.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. I'm going to sing it myself.
Good.
Ya 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 bam ba ya 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 bam bam ho ya ya yo ya ya yo oh ho ya 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 ba ya 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 oh ya 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 oh ho. I started too high. Oh, hi ya 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 yam ba da dum ba ya ya yam. Oh yida yidam ba da dum bum. Oh yidam ba ya ya home. Ha yidam ba ya ya yum. Ha yidam ba ho ya ya ho ya 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 yam bum. Ho ya ya yam bum bum. Oh yeah yeah yo. It's now here we have the discourse, the text of the discourse. I'm going to share the screen in a moment. We should have that. Right. So this is the text from which you should be able to see now, from the Rebbe's discourse of 1983, focusing on the 13th chapter. Now, we'll come to the material from the 13th chapter, and I'll explain that. So, Bati Legani achoti kala. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. Umevi kvod kedushat morich v'chami admor. And the previous Rebbe, whose yahrzeit it is now, said in that discourse, which he gave out to be studied on the 10th of Shevat, and since then it's become the custom to study it every 10th of Shevat, year by year, and he quotes what the Midrash said. Bati Legani, I've come into my garden, now lignuni, that explains the word gani, my garden, as gnuni, which means lamakom, the place, shaya ikari batchila, which was my essence at the beginning. So gnuni is sometimes translated bridal chamber. So the place where God and the Jewish people were in most intimate contact. The ikar shchina betachtonim haita, because the essence of the divine was in the lower world, and that means the physical world. And there, when God created the world, and there was the Garden of Eden, the physical Garden of Eden, and Adam and Eve, physical people, there was the divine presence. But and after that, through the various things that we know, what happened with Adam, eating from the tree of knowledge, the divine presence departed from the earth to the first firmament. And then there were 6 further negative things that happened after that, such as Cain killing Abel and so on. There's a whole list. And those, the Shekhinah ascended above to the 7th firmament. And after that, there came a number of tzadikei olam, great tzaddikim, righteous men, beginning with each of whom was his wife, or sometimes more than one wife. Beginning with Abraham, who was unique, who brought the Shekhinah from the 7th firmament down to the 6th. And similarly after that, generation after generation, tzaddik after tzaddik, until we got to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, our teacher, who was the 7th. And another midrash tells us that all the 7ths are precious. And he brought the Shekhinah from the 1st firmament down to the earth. And this is also the service of the Jewish people, because v'amech kulam tzadikim, your people are all tzadikim. We have to carry out that quality that a tzaddik carries out. Now, in the original discourse, it explains what is the role of a tzaddik. We talk about a tzaddik. A tzaddik's a very righteous person, male or female, very righteous person. What is the role of a tzaddik? To draw down godliness into this world. That's the true role of a tzaddik. And the Rebbe is here saying, we are all tzaddikim. We all have this power to achieve this. And that means that we can bring down below onto the earth in this lower world, that there's nothing lower than it, that this should be the dwelling for God. That's really our task. And whenever you look at the newspapers or whatever's replaced the newspapers, the internet or whatever it might be, telling us all the terrible things that are happening in the world of this kind and of that kind and the other, it all shows us that this is the lowest world, and it's in this world that we have to reveal the divine, and this is really the goal, that's the purpose of existence, that in the world with all its negativity, the divine should be revealed, and of course, the negative will be transformed into positive. Now, in fact, I said I was going to wait till I told you what was in chapter 13 of this discourse, but I think it's appropriate to mention something about it now. It talks about, in the 12th and 13th chapters, it talks about the way the radiance of the infinite ascends exaltedly high without limit, and also descends to the most profound depths, also without limit. And that means that however low we are in existence, and however low existence gets because of what happens in existence, the purpose of that is that the divine radiance should be there at that lowest level, should be revealed at that lowest level, and therefore what will happen is that it transforms the bad to good. So that's really the theme of this particular discourse that we're looking at now, is the way that bad is transformed to good by the radiance of the infinite, descending lower and lower. And of course, we have a part in that, bringing the divine radiance into the situation that we find ourselves. And it might be as a people, and it might be as an individual, where the person is aware of the negative aspects of their own being. And nonetheless, the divine percolates right down into that most negative aspect and ultimately transforms it to good. And that is the transformation of the whole of existence that we are endeavoring to achieve. And that was the purpose of creation right at the beginning, and of the giving of the Torah, to help us do that. And as part, you could say, of the divine revelation of the giving of the Torah, was this chain of Hasidic leaders with all their amazing discourses, and then finally the 7th Rebbe, the 7th Lubavitcher Rebbe, our Rebbe, whose teachings help us in our own individual lives, in every walk of life, whatever we do, help us reveal the divine and transform the darkness into light and the negative into positive. So that's a little summary of the rest of the discourse, the latter part of the discourse. And now we are looking at the way in which the effect of what we achieve is a revelation of the divine, and it speaks here about the revelation of the divine. Now they're looking at line 10. We have two ways in which Hasidic teachings describe the radiance of God. One is Or HaMamale Kol Almin, the radiance which fills the worlds. And so everything that there is in the world, everything in existence has got a divine radiance in it. And that divine radiance, as it were, fits the thing that it's within. It relates to that. It's like the soul within the body. It's something which is within that thing, whatever it might be. And everything is filled with this divine radiance if we only saw it. Talking about art, the Rebbe said that the role of an artist is to try to see, to be aware of that divine radiance which is in existence, and through his or her art, to communicate that to others by painting a painting which transmits the radiance which is within the world. So if the artist paints a landscape or a tree or whatever it might be, there should be the expression of the divine within that. Now that's one kind of radiance, the radiance within everything. But then there's another kind of radiance called Or HaSovev Kol Almin. Now here you have the words Or HaSovev Kol Almin. Literally that means the radiance which surrounds the world. But what they explain is it doesn't mean surround. It means transcend. It transcends the worlds, and it shines equally into all the worlds. So it transcends the physical nature of existence, and it shines everywhere. It's something which percolates into everything. And it is a transcendent radiance. The first kind of radiance you could call an immanent radiance, a radiance within, and the transcendent radiance is a radiance beyond. But it's there throughout existence, and it's that higher transcendent radiance that is revealed by the efforts that a person does in his or her service of the divine. In the original discourse, it speaks about when we carry out a mitzvah or restrain ourselves from doing something wrong, which is often part of our daily lives. Wrong, it might be wrong in action or wrong in speech or wrong in thought. Through that, this infinite transcendent radiance is revealed through all the worlds. Now, so line 19. Now, since the whole nature of Moses, our teacher, was to bring the Shekhinah down into the world, therefore, among the commands that he gave us was the very fundamental command, V'asuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham. Make for me a sanctuary and I will dwell within them. And it stresses that within them, it doesn't say within it, I'll dwell within it, I'll dwell within them, betoch kol echad ve'echad, inside each individual man and woman, the divine presence will dwell. Now, so that is achieved through making the sanctuary or the temple, and making the sanctuary or the temple has the effect of making the divine dwell inside each individual, which is a fascinating concept. So in addition to the fact that the command about making the sanctuary was something that pertains to Moses, and he gave the command, make the sanctuary, God is saying, make the sanctuary, he himself also took part in that. So Moses also was himself personally involved in making the sanctuary. In fact, the sages tell us that when they came to erect the sanctuary, they couldn't do it by themselves. Moses had to do it for them. And so through this is the essence of the divine presence being revealed in the lower world in the time of Moses. And now line 8, V'gam b'chol hazmanim shel ha'acharav. Similarly, at all the times after that, And it explains in the original discourse of the 6th Rebbe that the sanctuary was made of atzei shittim. Now, atzei shittim could be translated as acacia wood or cedar wood, something like that. But the word shittim relates to the word shtut, folly. And from this, and we're going to explain that in a moment, that's from this cedar wood that the planks of the sanctuary were made. Now, this word shita means folly, turning away from the right path, the straight path. So that's what folly is. A person turns away from the path, which is the straight, sensible path, and they go lower than that. And what does it mean, the sensible path? The divine path to work, to do charity and justice. So charity and justice are here being defined as the, or they define what is the ethical pathway, what is the path that a person should go. And if a person goes off that path, then that is the shtut. See the word shtut? That is the folly, like in modern Hebrew, yes? People say shtut, ridiculous, folly, stupid. That is the folly of this world. And the task is to transform this whole process of earthly folly, and instead to use the cedar wood, to make them into the planks of the sanctuary. And the word plank in Hebrew is keresh, but that is the same letters as the word sheker, falsehood. So the idea is to take the falsehood of the world and transform it into a plank of the sanctuary. To take the power for folly that we have and use it instead of a folly, a negative kind of folly, a self-indulgent kind of folly, a folly of holiness, sacred folly, where we go higher than the line of reason. So there's the line of reason, the line of charity and justice, and we sometimes go lower than the line. And there's also going higher than the line, which means self-sacrifice in various ways, considering the other before we consider ourselves. And through this, we transform the combinations of letters so that instead of falsehood, Shin Kuf Reish, it becomes Keresh, it becomes a plank of the sanctuary from which the temple is made, in which dwells the Holy One, the divine presence. Okay, so at this moment, we've, if we divide the discourse into bits, so this is a significant bit that we've just looked at together. So I'd like to ask if there are any comments or questions from anyone. Everyone agrees. Eleanor?
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with Bati Legani. So, yeah.
What do you say to Elabina?
I say I'm quite familiar with Bati Legani. I love it to bits because I love Shirim anyway, but Bati Legani is even more special. So yeah, I know it quite well. So yeah.
Lovely. And Amy, any comment?
Hi, no, I'm really interested in learning it because I learned it a while ago, but it's really interesting.
Okay.
Yeah, very much enjoying.
Okay, lovely. All right, so let's get back into it because now we're, as it were, moving on to like a further section of it. Now, so this is chapter 2 of this version, the 1983 version. The Hine and behold, Kadesha B'nai Yisrael Yuchlu, in order that the Jewish people should be able to fulfill their shlichut, their mission in this service of God, which has been described before, in order to do that properly, for that there has to be revealed Bechinat ha'otza shalamayla, a treasure house from above. Now, this is the imagery of the sort of the 11th, 12th, 13th chapter of the discourse. The idea of a king who has a treasure house of very, very rare and precious treasures, which he never looks at. And they're never shown to anyone. They're locked away. They're treasures from generations before. But now there is a battle taking place. And the nature of the battle is one that the king has to reach into this treasure house and reveal those treasures and give them to the soldiers who are going to be fighting the battle. Now, the way that this is understood is that the treasure are really the teachings of Hasidic teachings, because we have the Bible, we have the Talmud, and in the Talmud we have stories which are like a more spiritual dimension, and then we have the Kabbalistic teachings, the Zohar, and then we have the teachings of Hasidism. And Hasidism ascends to a higher level in its teachings, something very, very spiritual. Its ideas, and it's also got an experiential dimension. And these Hasidic teachings are like a treasure. And one can understand that the opposition to the Hasidic movement, this is just my suggestion that occurs to me this minute, studying together with you, the opposition to the Hasidic movement came from the appreciation that some kind of very exalted treasure was being revealed. And the great opponents of Hasidism, such as the Vilna Gaon, thought that that is wrong. You have to keep these treasures hidden. It can only be for a very exalted, very, very spiritual, holy person. It can't be given to ordinary people. And the Hasidim believed, yes, it should be given to ordinary people. And in fact, no one is ordinary. And everyone has a right to this treasure house in order to fulfill this cosmic battle, which is the battle to reveal the divine in the world. And as the world goes lower and lower, then it becomes more and more of a battle in order to reveal the divine. It's not just a happy pastoral existence, it's a very problematic existence, which includes the Holocaust and all kinds of negative things of the last few hundred years. And it's in this atmosphere, as the Baal Shem Tov was shortly after the Khmelnytsky massacres of the Jews, also very horrific. And so therefore, this treasure is given to each individual. And what this means is, now line 24, that because of the falsehood and the folly of the world, one can have an opponent, God forbid, of the Holy One, people opposing the divine. And then, so there's a thrust of atheism and of denial of God as there is now. For example, in the education system, a very strong attempt to push any kind of religious sensitivity off the table. There was a 1944 Education Act decreeing that there should be prayer in English schools. And now there's a strong force of people who want to stop that. They don't want there to be prayer in the schools. We're talking about the general state schools. Of course, private schools are able to do that. But so there are various negative thrusts and all kinds of negative thrusts in society. And so then there's aroused the quality of Netzach. Now, Netzach is the attribute victory of the Sfirot, and it describes a king. In the original discourse, there's a king, and there is this opposition to the king, and so therefore the king is aroused in order to try to win this battle. and to reveal godliness instead of godliness being concealed. And so the king spends the treasure. He opens up this treasure house. These treasure house that his ancestors, kings before him, had saved up, and they are very, very precious. And he never would use them. He wouldn't even let people see them. And nonetheless, because there is this crisis taking place in the world, in society and in the world, so therefore these treasures are taken out and are spent and are given to the soldiers so that they should be able to fight this battle. In other words, the deepest teachings of Torah are given over to each one of us to use in a positive way. As the famous story at the beginning of the Hasidic movement, someone found a piece of paper which had written on it a teaching by the second leader of Hasidism, the Maggid of Mezrich, and the opponents of Hasidism were very angry. How could you allow these sacred teachings? They found it in the gutter. How could you allow a page of such sacred teachings to be written down, and then so the person didn't appreciate it and lost it, left it in the gutter? So that's the treasure which needs to be given to each person. Now, where is the treasure? So in order to find out where the treasure is, we look in Tikkunei Zohar. Tikkunei Zohar is an important volume of the Zohar literature. There's the general Zohar, which follows the Sedra of the week. So there's Zohar on Bereshit, Zohar on Noach, and so on. And there is also Tikkunei Zohar, which has a different pattern. It's like 70 arrangements of the word Bereshit, and each arrangement of that word, like Barashit, he created 6, means the 6 days or the 6 Sfirot, or Yareh Boshet, awe and shame. So it's 70 combinations of the word Bereshit in the beginning, with explanations, long explanations of each. So what it says in Tikkunei Zohar, in this Zohar book, Or Ein Sof L'mayla Mayla Ad Ein Kates, the radiance of the infinite ascends upwards without limit and below without end. So that is the true treasure. And this treasure is given to all the people fighting in the battle, which means all of us. Every single Jew called Tzivot Hashem, the host of God. And as it said that in last week's Sedra, it said, Vayihi be'etzem hayom hazeh, this is the discourse we learned last week. It was on that very day that all the hosts of God went out of the land of Egypt by their hosts, and in such a way that they were going with a high hand, as it says in our Sedra of the week, B'shalach, that we're going out of the darkness of exile to the redemption. And this is a victory of this radiance of the infinite that comes down and is revealed below in a realm which is so far below that there is no end to it. So that's this idea from the Tikkunei Zohar of the radiance which goes up and revealing this tremendous treasure, and it also goes down to the lowest level. And then we come to the chapter 13, which relates to this year, the 13th time of the 13th time in the second cycle that the Rebbe was saying this in 1983. And now, so we could say that we're now 40 years later, another 2 cycles later. So the idea of going down below without limits, that is an idea of the many, many different levels of the down chaining of the radiance from one level to another level, till we come from the highest levels of the realm of the Sfirot, we come down to the realm of Bria, creation, Yetzirah, formation, Asiya, action. And then it comes down with much concealment until you could have something which is completely against the divine. So it's some force against the divine. And that is what's called Klippa, the shell, and the Sitra Achra, the other side. until we come to the Klippa of Paro, the whole idea of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. So the Pharaoh, king of Egypt, he represents something very negative. And in the Haftorah this week, it speaks about Pharaoh, and quoting from Ezekiel, and it says about Pharaoh, Li Yoori va'ani asisini. My river is mine, and I made myself. And so that represents total concealment of the divine, that Pharaoh does not recognize God, and he feels that everything good that he has, like the river Nile, he feels that that river Nile, it's his, and he made himself. He doesn't depend on anything. He doesn't depend on the divine. He's not created by the creator. He made himself. And the Rebbe adds that this is so also the way ordinary people conduct themselves. The beginning of the descent is in a little turn away, like a hair's breadth, just a hair's breadth little turn, away from emes, away from truth. And from this, the person goes down, 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 until they become sunk in desires. It might be permitted desires, until they go down, down, down into desires which are not permitted. And in this itself, there are many different levels. First of all, the desire is because the person has a passion for that thing. So the sages give a certain level of excuse to someone who's got a passion. So because he has a passion, he does something which is wrong. But then he goes lower than that he's doing it not because he has a passion. He's rebelling against God. And he's deliberately doing it not because he has a passion. He's doing it in order to show that these mitzvah have no meaning, and he doesn't believe in God, the whole idea of God commanding. As now, who was it? I'm just trying to think who it was. There was someone who, one of you would maybe remember who it is. He wrote a book called The Non-Jewish Jew. Does anyone remember who wrote that? And he describes in that, Amy, you got your hand up? You're muted.
Yeah, I was just wondering why the sorry, I can't pronounce the Vilna Gaon. Yeah, didn't want Hasidus to be taught. Like, what was his main reason? That it was.
He thought it should be for an elite.
Oh, is that
like
it?
A little elite of Kabbalists.
Okay.
Well, can I just, do you mind if I just say that it might be worth just briefly mentioning the whole scandal of Shabbat Tzvi? I think that kind of might have. I think it's worth mentioning that briefly about the scandal of Shabbat Tzvi, who used the Zohar as proof that he was Mashiach. That happened just before. It happened a generation before the Baal Shem Tov, and that's why the people like the Vilna Gaon were so very wary of Hasidus, because the Shabbat Tzvi had used the Zohar to claim that he was Mashiach. So that's
okay.
why, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. He didn't actually use it to claim he was Mashiach. He was using it to claim that you can do bad things against the Torah in order to bring Mashiach. That was the really problematic thing about Shabbat Tzvi.
Yeah. I also have one more question. What were you saying about prayer within the UK?
About what?
Prayer in Jewish schools. Oh, prayer in schools throughout the UK.
No, well, there's a movement to cancel out the idea of prayer in schools.
Oh.
So in non-Jewish schools, we're not talking about Jewish schools.
No,
in non-Jewish schools. So there's, with pluralist society that we have, many schools, they have this kind of assembly and that kind of assembly, or they have some kind of neutral prayer. The school has an assembly in the morning and they pray something. So there's a move to stop that.
I think it was the Rebbe who thought that, I listened to this really recently, that I think it was the Rebbe that when in America, when they stopped doing prayer in like Christian prayer every day in schools, that was the ignition of the 70s revolution, because it was like it was taking away that daily the reminder that there was a God, like, even though it was like, it wasn't Jewish prayer. I think
it was a non-denominational prayer. It was called the Regent's Prayer.
Yeah.
And it was said in schools, and then I think it was 1962, they abolished it.
Yeah, and
you're quite right that the Rebbe was very upset about that, and he said they should have prayer in schools. And then he modified that later to a moment of silence. So at this moment in America, in many states, there's a strong movement for having moment of silence in schools, and many schools do have it. So they have like a minute, and the student thinks, and the idea is their parents tell them what to think, and so it enables communication between parents and children, and it's a very interesting thing.
Sorry to change the subject slightly. I'm going to mute
well,
myself now.
It really relates to it very much, because we're talking about a world which is going lower and lower.
Yeah.
Now, so this idea of reaching up to these exalted heights and getting this empowerment, which enables us to come down, down, down into the world and transform the negativity of the world. And that's the sort of the battle which is taking place. And it's in those terms that we are now looking at what comes next in the discourse. Now, the point is that we, the Jewish people, there is a saying that Et ha'olam natam b'libam. God puts the world into the hearts of the Jewish people, or people in general. And so therefore what people do has an effect on the world. So the fact that people are denying God in one way or the other, in a kind of secularist mode, that affects the whole down-chaining of existence. And the thing is that there are realms of holiness, and there's also lower realms of unholiness. And in that there are many degrees. And so there are the 4 klipot. There's klipat noga, which is a shell, a concealment of the divine, but it's called noga, which means light. And then there are lower klipot, which are lower, which are completely dark. And then we come to the level of Pharaoh, who says, it's my river and I made myself. And that is a concept of complete rebellion against God. So now the Rebbe asks, why is it that we go into this, the original discourse, why does it go into this so much? And he quotes from the Kabbala and from the Zohar, this whole idea of going down, 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 all these negative things. Why is the Zohar, as it were, and other aspects of the Kabbalah so concerned to discuss this realm of unholiness? So why don't we just pretend it doesn't exist? Why do these Kabbalistic, mystical Torah teachings explore so far, that there is this kind of klipa, this kind of shell, and that kind of shell? And so the Rebbe suggests that we might say, this is on page Lamed Gimel, that since God looked into the Torah and created the world, therefore, in order that existence could have all these different levels, the way it is, we don't understand why, but God wants that there should be all these different negative levels. First of all, he has to be able to look in the Torah in order to create those levels. So all those different things, first of all, have to be in the Torah, in Kabbala and Hasidic teaching. So in other words, all the negative things have to be there in the Torah so that God can create the world, because God wants a world with negativity. Maybe, I mean, it doesn't say that here, but maybe to give us a choice so that we have a choice. There's the negative and we can choose the positive. And in order to create that negativity, so it has to be somewhere in the Torah so that it comes from the Torah into the world. But then this whole idea that there is negativity is actually in order to fulfill God's purpose. Because everything, there's a saying of the sages, everything that God created in his world, he created for his glory. And in other words, if there's something negative, it's created negative in order that we should transform it to positive. As the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, he explained the words, Sur merav aseh tov. Now that's a verse in Psalms. Turn away from bad and do good. So normally we explain, keep away from doing bad things and do positive things. It's often applied to the negative commands, 365 negative commands. Turn away from bad by keeping them, and then do good by keeping the 248 positive commands. But the Baal Shem Tov explained it differently. But we should make from the bad into good. So turning away from bad is only the beginning of the service. The real service is not just that we turn away from bad. We take the bad and we make it good. Now that's an amazing thing. I mean, that is really the central concept in Hasidic teaching, the ability to change negative into positive. And that is the transformation of darkness to light and of bitterness into sweetness. And as the Halacha puts it, that's in the Talmud in Tractate Yuma, which is the tractate about Yom Kippur. It talks about the way a deliberate transgression can be transformed into a positive mitzvah. That even though the person did something which was a deliberate transgression, somehow through the process of repentance, the Talmud there says, through repentance from love, that deliberate transgression can be transformed into a mitzvah. In other words, the transgression, one way of understanding it, the transgression makes the person feel such a yearning and longing for God. They feel bad that they did that transgression, and instead of, they feel that that makes them feel far from God. Now they want to be close to God. So the transgression becomes a spring, which is pushing them closer and closer to God. So the end is that the transgression has changed its whole quality. Instead of pushing them away from God, it's become something which pushes them towards God. Until it tells, so in other words, we have the idea of transforming bad to good. Now, so we had that idea from the Baal Shem Tov, and the Rebbe then quotes from the Talmud, V'ad shemesupa b'Torah, till it tells a story in the Torah, this is in the Talmud, Maiserav, an event that happened. She'otan matzaot, those bedclothes that she had spread for him in a forbidden way, she now spread it for him in a permitted way. Now this is a story in Tractate Menachot about a man who heard that there was a very attractive, a very beautiful prostitute, and he wanted to see what she was like, and he came along to her, and just as he was going to get into bed with her, his tzitzit flicked him in the face, the strands of his tzitzit. And he suddenly thought to himself, I can't do this, it's wrong. And he got off the bed, and she said, why aren't you coming into the bed? And he said, I'm sorry, I can't. And he ran away. And she ran after him. And she found out where he came from. He came from a certain yeshiva. And she found out where he was. And she decided, she wasn't Jewish, she decided she's going to convert to Judaism and she's going to marry him. And that's what happened in the story in the Talmud. And as it puts it here, the bedclothes that she spread for him in a forbidden way, now she spread for him in a permitted way. So in other words, this story is an account of something negative being transformed into something positive. And then the Rebbe says, Shezohi hora'ah nitzchit. This is an eternal instruction l'chol echad ve'echad Yisrael, to every single Jew, shebekocho lahafoch et hara letov, that we have the power to change bad to good. And then this is repeated by Rabbi Shneur Zalman in Tanya, that we have the task to make a dwelling for God in the lower world, the lowest world, that there's nothing lower than this. And that's right down lowest realm. And there too, we are able to transform things into good. So, so the Rebbe asks a question on this. Surely we don't want to be tested by God. Why are we talking about getting into situations of this lower world? This man with the prostitute, it was a terrible test for him. You know, thank God he survived the test and managed. She was very impressed with the way he ran away because of its tzitzit. And so it turned out good. But not everyone is able to stand that temptation. So how can you ask every single Jew to be involved in transforming the lower negative thing down to the lowest level? And so there we have the idea of the verse, come to Pharaoh. And why does it say come to Pharaoh instead of go to Pharaoh? It says, Boyo Paro, come to Pharaoh. And what does it mean, come? It means that God is leading the person room within room. Moses, he's leading Moses room within room in all the external levels. And Moshe is frightened. And God saw that Moses was frightened. He said, don't worry. I am myself there, and I'm going to control Pharaoh. Don't you worry about him, and I have to deal with him, and you don't have to worry at all. So that implies that Moses was frightened of coming too close to Pharaoh, this very sinister figure in the Torah, and God says, you know what? I'm going to sort out Pharaoh. Don't you worry. And that's why God says, I'm going to cope with Pharaoh. So, so this is the power that everyone has got, that we've got the power to transform the lowest negative level. I think this is a question. You see, in the case of Moses comes, is too frightened to come close to Pharaoh, so God says, I'll sort out Pharaoh. Pharaoh, you don't have to worry. But here the demand seems to be that each one of us should be able to transform negativity into positive. And how can we do that? And so then comes a very, very beautiful sequence in this discourse about the way in which each person is able to transform the negative into positive. But before we come to that, let's just see if anyone has a point that they want to ask or discuss. Is everyone okay with what we're saying? Eleanor?
Yeah, it's a lot to take in.
It is. I mean, basically, we're living surrounded by various kinds of negativity. And the promise of this Hasidic teaching is that we have the ability to change the negative to positive.
Yeah, this struck me the other day. I was listening to a group of patients, people suffering with the same disease I've got, and the conversation had reached a really difficult point where people were acknowledging that although research is racing ahead and they now understand far more about pathology of this than they did, there won't be effective treatments, or very, very, very unlikely to be effective treatments in time for many of us. You know, it's going to take 20 years, maybe 10 to 20 years. But somebody then spoke into this conversation, but we can be happy because future generations of people with this disease will have the help that we've longed for, and it is going to come. And I thought that was quite powerful because
Very profound.
it was giving us permission to be joyful for others, that they would find relief in new medications, new treatments. Probably there'll be some gene therapy involved, and all sorts of things will happen. That they will learn how to get our immune systems to behave themselves, and we can be delighted that they
Very,
will
very
benefit.
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
I that hit me, and I think, yes, if we have a calling to transform negativity, what a privilege that is, and what potential that has.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, let's go back into the discourse. So we can understand this through the teaching of the Maggid of Mezrich. That's the second leader of Hasidism. And he quotes, there's a verse that was in last week's Sedra, Leman shiti ototai, in order that I should put my signs, Ela, these my signs, bikirbo, within him. That means that God wants to sift all the sparks from Egypt, which fell in the breaking of the vessels. There's this event, Kabbalistic event described by Rabbi Isaac Luria, that there was a breaking of the vessels before the beginning of the universe, before the beginning of creation. But in the spiritual realms, the breaking of the vessels, which meant that there were sparks of holiness which had been lost, so to speak, in the lower realms, and they are part and parcel of the lower realms. And that's all the dvarim haptelim, the useless speech of Pharaoh and of Egypt. In other words, the negative things about Pharaoh and Egypt, that they are letters, shehem otiot, they're like letters. And that with these letters, there will be the sifting of the world. That these words, these letters, in other words, the account, the story of Pharaoh is put in the Torah. And in the Torah, the false combinations of letters which express the evil of Pharaoh are rearranged in the Torah, and they become part of the Torah, and they become something holy. And as they becoming holy and being part of the Torah, that is their sifting and their transformation. So God is saying that by means of the Torah, I'm going to transform bad into good. And that was the last three plagues that happened to Egypt. they had to happen in order that they should be part of the Torah, which is like taking something very negative from Egypt and putting it in the Torah so that it should become something positive. So all of these, now visualizing this as letters, which are like little packets of power. We're talking here about Hebrew letters, Alef, Bet, Gimel. So these little packets of power which come into the universe and create everything. Everything is created by a stream of letters from the divine into the world, like rays of energy which are creating everything and making everything exist. And the Hebrew name for any object is its spiritual dimension. And so there is this power that comes in, which are actually my letters, the divine letters. And the thing which is higher falls lowest. So that thing which is on the lowest level actually starts on the highest level. And we have to rearrange those letters and put them back where they're supposed to be, that they should be sacred letters. And so therefore they're written in the Torah. That was the question earlier on. Why does the Kabbala and Hasidic teachings describe all this about the negative realms, the klipot, the forces of evil? Because they're in the Torah, because that is their real place to be. And through the fact that they are, they emerge as low letters in something which is very low, which is very bad and negative and hostile to holiness, but we can rearrange them. And we have got the power to take those letters and put them back into the way they were, in such a way that they can become something holy. And that's what the Maggid, the second leader of Hasidism, he said the sifting of the meaningless words of Pharaoh and of Egypt, that is what is being rearranged, and by putting it in the Torah. So all the descriptions of Pharaoh and the plagues of Pharaoh, all this is in order to get to the point where Pharaoh lets the people go. And letting the people go, that means that Pharaoh is sending he is helping the Jewish people to leave Egypt, because it's in this way that the letters, the sparks of Pharaoh are being sifted, and they become my letters, God says. And all this is because they were first of all written in the Torah. So in other words, we seem to have several different levels. The idea of negativity is written about in the Kabbala, and then we have the actual realms of impurity and unholiness, like Pharaoh and the slavery to Pharaoh, and then that is itself written in the Torah, the whole idea of the slavery and how the slavery began, and then how there were the plagues. All this is transforming the reality so that it should be a positive reality. And it gets transformed in this sort of literary means by the fact that it goes into the Torah, and then it becomes part of Torah, and we learn the Torah, and so that transforms the negative reality into something positive. And in that sense, it is then the slavery is changed into freedom. So, and the Rebbe is going to go on and speak about the Talmud doing the same thing, that when the Talmud describes all kinds of negative behavior, it's a way of transforming that behavior. By us learning that in the Torah. So are there any comments on this from anyone? Tehillah Bina?
Yeah, no, I think you put it really well. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Eve, any comment? Okay, let's go back. Right. Now then, we can consider again this problematic question that he asked before. We ask God, it's part of the daily morning prayers. Don't bring me into a test. Don't give me any moral, spiritual challenges. I want everything to be easy. So don't give me any tests. We all ask God this if we read that part of the prayer. And if we don't read that part of the prayer, it's in the prayer book and it's part of our connection with God. So despite that, despite the fact that now, you see, this is in 1983. The Rebbe has sent emissaries to many different parts of the world, not quite as many parts of the world as there are now, 40 years later, but certainly many parts of the world. And he was encouraging the making of new Chabad houses. And for a Hasidic young man and woman with a few children to be in an area where there is no strong Jewish community and no kosher food shops and far from a mikveh, let's say, a ritual pool. So this can be a very challenging situation. So how can the Rebbe send people into those challenging situations? So he's saying, we can actually ask from every Jew to be involved in transforming those things which are on a very low level, because this means what it means is sifting them through studying those things as they are in the Torah. So as we find, for example, concerning idolatry, so there's a command that we should not turn to idolatry, which also means we shouldn't read idolatrous books. And we shouldn't find out details or laws or rules or customs of idolatry. Nonetheless, in the Torah, we're commanded to study the whole Torah. Now, in the Torah, there are also laws of idolatry. In Maimonides, there's a whole long section, laws of idolatry. And there it explains many things about how idols were served in order to clarify the halakha, in order to clarify the law. And that means that those things that are in the Torah, they become a part of the Torah. And like we read about Jacob and Esau. So Esau is a negative person, but Esau, who is in the Torah, that is part of the sacred Torah. And so when we learn in the Torah, in the Talmud, or in Maimonides, we learn the laws of idolatry, in that itself, we are nullifying, neutralizing the passion for idolatry. And especially we're able to change the whole nature of the existence of the idolatry simply by studying the Torah about that. And this is something actually that Rabbi Shneor Zalman mentions in his book Torah Or, which is Teachings of Rabbi Shneor Zalman. So in the first exile, which was the exile in Egypt, we had terrible slavery with chomer ulevenim, with mortar and bricks. So that was all very difficult and in Egypt. But then it says in the Zohar that when it says chomer, which means mortar, it means kal v'chomer, argument a fortiori, which we have in the Talmud. Levenim, bricks, comes from the word libun, making something white, clarifying the law. So the Zohar translates the slavery of Egypt into the process of studying Talmud with the arguments a fortiori and clarifying the law and many other details which dissolve away, as it were, the servitude in Egypt and make it a positive and spiritual relationship with God. And so by the fact that a person makes this great effort to understand the Talmud, that is like, sort of parallel to the effort that people had in Egypt, working for the Egyptian taskmasters. So in that, one is changing over the whole way in which we relate to to the divine, that we're taking the negative aspects and we are making them part of something positive, and we are changing their whole nature so that they become something positive. And that's really that's really the nature of the service for every individual Jew, including the way in which we are able to contemplate in prayer, that we should be able to see beyond the surface level and see the profundity that there is in everything, and it's that aspect of the divine which is there at every step in our lives. Now, we then have the idea that when we get involved with something which is very low, how does that affect us? Could it be that by being involved with something which is on a low spiritual level, is that going to stick into us in some way? And so it means we have to have a kind of double vision, that we're looking at something negative, but we don't see that negative thing. What we see is the divine. As it says, Da et Elokei Avicha, know the God of your father. And it's that knowledge of God that brings a person, which is the end of the verse, and serve God with a whole heart. Because then the person does not have to worry about the low things that they're dealing with, right? So you can imagine a person who is involved in, let's say he's in he and his wife are in some little town somewhere, and there are all kinds of challenges, and the question is, how do they look at those challenges? And what the Rebbe is saying here is, look at the godliness, go beyond the negativity, and don't get stuck on the negativity. Go beyond the negativity and just and don't see it. See the godliness which is really there. See the soul which is in the person, and not the negativity that they might represent in one way or the other. And so that is that's the challenge. Now, going back 1 second, this is quite a hefty thing that we've just been discussing. It's a very, very challenging concept, but a very, very important concept. And one can imagine trying to apply that, whether in the university or in other aspects of life, that we do not let ourselves get caught by the negative things that are around, and we just try to perceive the divine in every dimension. So are there any comments on that?
Yes, I would have to say something. It could be that the negative force which we try to tackle is so destructive that it can overcome us. So it's a danger, and you have to be v'nishmatem lenafshotechem, which means you have to keep away from something which can ruin you, after all. So you have to know the limits.
I think you're making a very good point, Rivka. And I would say that in certain situations, you say, okay, Adkan, one can go to this point, but not to that point. And in fact, when we consider actual shluchim, the emissaries of the Rebbe, who are very, very often presented with extremely difficult situations, and there's a lot of discussion among them about how to deal with that. And, quite often the answer is, look, you can't deal with that, you better leave it alone. So you're quite right. So the Rebbe is here presenting a very positive attitude, but elsewhere he does also warn about being careful. So you're quite right. That's a very good point.
Thank you.
No, just that ties in really nicely. There's something in the Talmud. I can't remember exactly where it is. I'm sure you could tell me. It says the Yetzer Hara starts off as thin as a spider's web and ends up being, solid iron chains. So yeah, that ties in nicely what we were where does it in the Gemara? Is it? Do you know?
I can't remember where, but you're quite right about the idea of the Yetzer Hara beginning in a very small way, and then becoming more. First, it tells the person to do this and to do that, which is just like a little thing, and then it gets worse and then worse and worse. And there's also another passage which speaks about when Mashiach comes, people will look at the Yetzer Hara, and the tzaddikim will see it as I think this is the way it goes. They'll see it as a big mountain, and they say, "Wow, I managed to conquer that! Thank God." And the people who gave in to the Yetzer Hara will see it as a tiny little mound. And they said, I couldn't hold myself back with that little mound. And why didn't I hold myself back? So there are a number. But also there's a very pertinent thing that we say in the Shema, we should serve God b'chol levavecha, with all your heart. And the Talmud in Brachot says about that, serve him. Why is it a double word, levavecha, instead of libcha? Because we should serve God with our Yetzer Tov, our good desire, and our Yetzer Hara, our bad desire as well. So that's really about this kind of transformation.
And can I just say, I do find that with Chassidus and Kabbala, that it does appeal to my Yetzer Hara as well as my Yetzer Tov.
Well,
sometimes it appeals more to my Yetzer Hara, but anyway.
Listen, we are whole people, and we need constant watchfulness to see that we're doing the right thing at this moment.
Yeah,
that's always a challenge. And then we go back. This is section Chet, near the end of the discourse. Now one can add at a deeper level. The fact that the Zohar tells us that Moses was frightened of the klipa, of the negativity of Pharaoh, that's because he had to confront Pharaoh too head on, too closely, like being aware of Pharaoh. And because the only way of dealing with Pharaoh was being aware of him, which was too demanding, that's too dangerous, God said, all right, I'm going to deal with him myself. But other things, so that is talking about that level of involvement. But we do not have to do things in that way. Kasher, so however, this is line 9 on page 40. However, when a Jewish person connects with God through studying these things in the Torah, and he's studying them in order to know God, not in order to know the idolatry or the other negative thing. So that means, and he's studying Torah in a way that he's aware of the godliness in the Torah. He knows that God gives the Torah constantly. And that when he learns Torah, God is saying the words of Torah with him. As the Baal Shem Tov said, Hashem tzilcha, God is your shadow. That like the shadow imitates what the person does, so God, so to speak, does what the person is doing. And so even then, going down to the lowest level, when we have that perception, we are still connected above. Since he's going there from his involvement in learning of Torah and in such a way of know God your Father. And he succeeds in this in an amazing way. Everything becomes for him the whole ma'asecha l'shem shamayim. All your actions are for the sake of heaven. And know God in all your ways, so that the person knows God in all their ways, and in that way he's able to succeed in this battle. The battle in order to transform the nations, that all the nations should call together on the name of God and serve God together and God will be recognized as king in the way in which God is spoken about in the Torah, the Tanakh, and the Talmud, and in such a way that the name Yud-Ke Vav-Ke will be able to be pronounced eventually, and the radiance of God shines below in the world, and all flesh sees together that Hashem is speaking. And all this, the Rebbe ends off now in the last paragraph, should be swiftly in our days, that the time of all the sifting of sparks has really come to an end, and the polishing of the buttons, the previous Rebbe would say, all we have to do now is polish the buttons, and now the Jewish people are called the hosts of God, and that means hosts which are submitting to God. And each one of the soldiers, that each one of us receives from that tremendous treasure, that precious treasure we receive from the broad and open hand of God, in such a way that those who are still in exile in Egypt, it becomes for them, there will be light for the whole Jewish people where they dwelt. And immediately after that, the Jewish people go out with a high hand and through with Mashiach Tzidkenu in the true and complete redemption swiftly in our days. So
Amen. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you, Shikoya.